Bring up our slides.
Thank you so much, everyone, for joining. Super excited to have Rossi and Brandi McKenzie here today with us to talk about YIT. And I'm actually just going to pass it right over to Ann and Brandi.
All right. Hello, everyone. I know most of you, but for those of you that maybe don't know me, my name is Ann Rossi. I am the education analyst for DHHS under Children's Services for Foster Care Program on this. I'll let Brandi, if you want to intro yourself.
Yes, Brandi McKenzie. So I work alongside Ann, and I oversee YIT, United, and a couple of our contracts that we have. I'm also help coordinate the statewide youth advisory board and MYOI.
All right, and we will let Brandi will actually get us started here for the first part in a minute, but I wanted to just quickly give a little bit of info on kind of why we're here and what we'll be covering. So I get quite a bit of questions about youth in transition funding and our YIT funding. And so I thought this was going to be a good opportunity to have Brandi come in and go over that. She came to one of our last in-person HEC meetings. It would have been in 18 or 19 to talk about youth in transition. So those of you that were around back then, this may be just a lot of refresher information. And for those of you that are new, maybe some of this will be some brand new information for you. So when I first talked to Carrie, we thought we'd do the YIT, and then I also get a lot of questions about YVAC, our young adult voluntary foster care. So we thought we'd include that. But then when we were putting the slides together, we actually thought there's some other information that may be helpful to you all as well, in addition to those two pieces. So even though this was kind of put out there as just YIT and a YVAC training, we're actually going to talk about a hodgepodge of a lot of different services and policy requirements for our older youth in care. So I will definitely cover the YVAC piece, and we will cover the YIT as we said, but we'll cover some additional information too. So I will go ahead and pass it to Brandi, because she is going to cover first YIT and MYY.
Awesome, thank you, Ann. Okay, we can get started. So the youth in transition program. And so you'll hear like youth in transition kind of interchangeably discussed as a program, but essentially YIT is a funding source, and it's a federal funding source that the state receives to support older youth and their transition out of foster care into in developing independent living skills. So one of the priorities of MDHHS is to improve the success of our youth who have experienced foster care. And so with that, we want to make sure that our youth have the tools that are needed for them to make a successful transition into adulthood from being in our child welfare system. So the goal is to really help our young adults make the transition, and so that they will have the ability to take care of themselves physically, socially, economically, and psychologically. The federal law actually mandates that states and local governments offer an extensive program of education, training, employment, and financial support for young people leaving the foster care system. And so in other states, while their programs may look a little different than our program here in Michigan, we are all required to have these programs in place for young adults. So we know that independent living is an ongoing process. And so it's about really helping youth with skill development and ultimately assuming responsibility for themselves, right? We want to make sure that our young people have the skills that are going to be necessary for them to be successful and them to ultimately be positive contributing members of our society, right? So IL services should be provided should provide practical experiences that are designed to assist the youth with developing skills for their transition. So YIT, as I indicated, is essentially a funding source. And so it's derived from the federal funding source called SHAFE. So federally, we receive a SHAFE allocation. And our SHAFE allocation is used to support our YIT services, our MYOI program, several of our independent living contracts, and also ETV is also Chafee funded. So the John H. Chafee Foster Care Independence Program offer assistance to help current and former foster care youth achieve self-sufficiency. So how it works here in Michigan is that the funding is allocated to our state from the federal government, and then we allocate the funds to the local, our local child welfare offices. Next slide, please. Right, when we look at eligibility for YIT, so youth had to have had an open foster care case on or after their 14th birthday and was placed in an eligible placement after their 14th birthday in order to be eligible. In addition to youth who had open foster care cases, youth who have open delinquency cases after their 14th birthday and were placed with MDHHS in a supervised foster care placement are also eligible for YIT funds. Some of the delinquency youth, the issues that we see that makes them not eligible is placement. So our policy, which is FOM 950, that we can actually share with you as well, or you can actually Google it and it'll come up, actually specifies what we consider eligible versus ineligible placements. So an eligible placement is like a relative caregiver or a foster parent, if they were in a approved residential facility, or if they spent some time in a shelter like a children's village. Those are all considered eligible placements. Of course, if they're in independent living or semi-independent living, those are also considered eligible placements. Some of our ineligible placements are going to be jail, detention facilities. And so that's where some of our delinquency youth are not going to be eligible, because some of them were never in eligible placements. They may have went from the community placements of their parents' home to a detention facility back to the parental home. And in that case, they were never in a YIT eligible placement. Adoptive homes are also not considered foster care placements. So if the youth was placed in an adoptive home, let's say they were placed in an adoptive home at 12, right? That is not considered a YIT eligible placement, or they were placed in an adoptive home at 13. Those are not considered YIT eligible placements. Youth is currently between the ages of 14 and 23. So youth are ineligible for YIT on their 23rd birthday. And so everything, like if you're working with a young person and they're quickly turning 23, just keeping in mind that we have to have everything processed before they turn 23. This is a federal rule. There's no exceptions we can make as it relates to this. So that's why it's imperative that we just have conversations with our young people, especially if they're approaching that 23rd birthday, to see if there's anything that they could potentially utilize a YIT for. Closed case youth. So youth are still eligible for YIT even if their case is closed, as long as they met the eligibility requirements prior to case closure. So the eligibility requirements would be that they were in a foster care placement, so their foster care case was open after their 14th birthday. So if their case closed at 13, they're not going to be eligible for YIT. So they have to have been in a foster care placement after their 14th birthday, in an eligible placement, right? And they're between the ages of 18 and 23. So youth with closed cases are still eligible up until their 23rd birthday. If youth are 16 and 17, which these are typically not, I guess sometimes you guys may get 17-year-olds. If they were 16 or 17 when their case closed and they did not access YIT, so if they're 16 or 17 now and they did not access YIT prior to their case closing, they're not going to be eligible for YIT until they turn 18 years old. So they're going to be eligible based on the criteria of them being in foster care on or after their 14th birthday. But addition to that, our policy indicates that for closed case youth only, if they're 16 or 17, they had to access YIT prior to that case closing. If they did not, they just won't be eligible again they're 18. All right. Next slide. So this is a list of some of the items that YIT can be used for. So we have like a list of pre-college expenses. So books and supplies, tutoring, internships, extracurricular activity, sports clubs, GED, all of those kind of pre-college expenses, senior dues, all of that kind of stuff. So you may even, you know, if you're doing campus tours, or you have youth that are planning to come to your university and they're still in high school, right? Just also reiterating to them that they're eligible for some of these pre-college expenses too. Also summer school or to accelerate. So we've had young people who were dually enrolled. So they may be still in high school, but taking some classes at the local community college. We can also use YIT to cover them taking accelerated studies as well. Vocational and employment. So I think that as it relates to your population, keeping in mind that we can use YIT to pay for vocational equipment, interview clothing. So if the young person is looking for employment, state identification cards, driver's licenses, certification courses. So a common certification course that we often get requests for is like CNA. We even have some of our young people who are like enrolled in, you know, college who are also gonna go take the 2-week CNA class. License and certification fees. So we also can use YIT to pay for if they're trying to get just some additional certifications that are not ETV eligible, obviously. They would have to then use ETV for. Uniforms and footwear. Another piece of it is like work uniforms too. You can use YIT if they need like a specific, specific attire for work. So maybe they need non-slip, shoes or anything of those sorts. We can use YIT for that as well. Okay, sorry, next slide. All right, YIT can also be paid for housing. And so there's a lifetime limit. So for some of our more, I guess, high ticket items, you will see that there's a lifetime limit. So that means the youth, their time in foster care, when their time from open or close, so their eligibility between 14 and 23, they cannot exceed the lifetime limit in some of these categories. Housing is one of those. A youth has a lifetime limit of $1,500, and that's for first month's rent security deposit. They also have a lifetime limit for startup goods. So if a youth is getting into their first apartment, we have a lifetime limit of that $1,000 to help them, get some basic things that they're going to need. So pots, pans, dishes, maybe a bed, a couch, those sorts of things. We also have a lifetime limit of $500 for baby supplies, and that's per child. So that's for youth who are pregnant and parenting. We can also use YIT funds to purchase some of the necessary items that they're going to need for their baby. For both housing and startup goods, so for both housing and startup goods, youth had to have been in foster care on their 18th birthday. So while youth are eligible for YIT at the age of 14, in order for them to access YIT for housing and startup goods, they must have been in out-of-home care at the age of 18 years old. And both Ann or myself, we can look into that if you're wanting to confirm that a youth is eligible for housing resources. Transportation is also another big kind of expenditure. We do have like $5,000 as the lifetime limit for a vehicle purchase. I know, and we know that due to inflation, youth tend to need to put some more additional funding with the $5,000, but we're not looking at increasing that because we just don't have the funding to support spending more money on vehicle purchases. So that is that lifetime limit of $5,000. So you essentially may, save a little bit of money, get the $5,000 from us, and they should be able to get, a decent car. Driver's training, which I can imagine a lot of your young people are not going through driver's training because they're over the age of 18. But we have made some exceptions to help youth with driver hours. So sometimes our young people are 18, they were unable to go to driver's training, but still need obviously some practice driving, which we want them to get that practice driving. And so we've made some exceptions to pay for like driving hours to help the young person get some practice driving. We just always want to make sure that if we're accessing YIT for transportation, it is for their education or employment goals. We also have a $900 repair, right, for a vehicle purchase. Our youth are buying $5,000 cars, right? So those are not always maybe the best in the best condition sometimes. And so we can expect that at some point, a youth is going to need to make a repair to that car. We also you can also utilize YIT for vehicle insurance up to 6 months. And so vehicle, as we all know, insurance in Michigan is expensive, but try being a young adult in Michigan is even more expensive. So we can pay for 6 months, or that you can use YIT to pay for insurance for 6 months. With both with the vehicle purchase and the insurance purchase, we have to make sure that youth are able to afford afford a vehicle. And that's a big thing that we see sometimes, where we're getting requests to purchase youth vehicles, and the youth then can't afford the ongoing maintenance. So they can't afford tires, they can't afford, even I see sometimes they can't afford to get the registrations. And so we want to make sure that we, when we're putting in requests and we're having these conversations with youth, that they are able to afford the car, right? Specifically, if we have youth financing cars, we have to make sure that they can afford the car. I just got a request about a month and a half ago, a young person, I think the car note was either $600 or close to $600. Older, older is not like a 2023 vehicle, but the APR was like 24%, right? And so ultimately that youth won't potentially be able to sustain that at that rate working at McDonald's, right? So just making sure that while there are things in our policy that we can pay for, that doesn't necessarily mean that youth are automatically going to get it, right? Like they have to be able to demonstrate they can afford a car, they can afford insurance. Bus cars is also something else that you have the ability to apply for. It's not in our policy, but we have made exceptions for like a moped or a bike, recognizing that some of our youth just don't have a license. Maybe they're not even interested in obtaining a license. And so thinking of alternative means of transportation for them. And then we have a lifetime limit of $1,500 for a computer, a laptop, tablet. This is including software, printer, a carrying case, all of the accessories that they're going to need for that laptop. Another thing that we see with the laptops is our policy indicates that if a youth is ETV eligible, they have to access ETV for any post-secondary expenditures. And so if you are doing college tours with some of our young people, maybe asking them, like, do you have a laptop? And if so, like, if not, right, maybe they look at accessing YIT before they go to college, because our policy does indicate that ETV has to be used for post-secondary. So we can't use YIT to cover books or tuition or anything like that, because those are considered ETV eligible expenditures. I am going to pull up the chat because I see questions coming through, and I'm going to answer some questions.
I was gonna, if you want me to go through, I was answering some of them at the beginning, but I thought I could, and I know some of these you're going to get to, so I was trying to filter like what you've already passed. So there was an eligibility question, so I wanted to get to that one because you already kind of passed eligibility. Do our youth with delinquency only cases remain eligible for YIT after their cases close up until their 23rd birthday? Yes, long as they met eligibility requirements before their case closed. So making sure that they were under our placed with MDHHS, because youth can have a delinquency case and never be placed with MDHHS. So they have to have been placed with MDHS.
and they had to have at some point been in an eligible placement. So if a youth or a young person goes from parental home to a detention center back to the parental home, they're not going to be eligible. But if a youth goes from parental home, detention center, foster home, back to a parental home, they did at that point, they were in a eligible placement as long as they were after, it was after their 14th birthday.
Oh, okay. So, here's a question about the startup goods policy changed some time ago. How can we be up to speed with changes so we're giving students correct information? And I can actually answer this for the coaches, Brandi, that like, and I could have possibly missed sending it out, but I do try to get like updates to any of our policy requirements or procedure requirements out to this group. So, but I don't know if you have anything else to add to that, Brandi, but I can make sure in the future to double make sure that I get it out to coaches, because this is, you guys are like kind of my group that I would send it to you and then send it to Carrie also to make sure that you get it too. Is there anything else you want to add though, Brandi?
I guess I'm curious as to what policy changed. I think it's at least for the last like 5 years, that startup policy has been the same. So is something else being communicated about startup goods? No, Kathy?
Okay. And you kind of mentioned this though. Is there any conversation on increasing the amounts due to inflation? You kind of touched on that, but.
Yeah, so as it relates to some of our lifetime limits, there is no conversation about increasing those amounts because we are not receiving an increase from our federal government as it relates to into our actual SHAPE allocation. So we would not look at increasing any of our amounts listed in policy because we just won't have the funding to support it, right? We get pretty close to utilizing our complete YIT budget. We don't tend to have extra money. And so with that being said, we don't have the funding as of now to look at potentially increasing the lifetime limit, for example, a vehicle to 6,000, because we don't have the funding to support that. Michigan is also one of few states that even like purchases vehicles and insurance and car repairs. And so we're kind of ahead in terms of helping our young people in those areas. But essentially a young person, you know, they want a vehicle, it's an assistance, right? At this point, we're assisting them in purchasing a vehicle. They will potentially need to have some money saved to put towards that purchase as well.
So there's a few questions and I think you might get into some of this. So if you want to skip it, but there's some questions about like how long a request should take and what if students are being told there's no funding, some things like that. So if you wanted to hit on that now, or if you're going to eventually hit on kind of the applying process.
Yeah, so nope, I can hit on those now. As it relates to youth being told that the county is out of funding, that is very possible. And so what we communicate to the counties is if they are completely have exhausted their YIT budgets, that they reach out to our office and we can look at potentially moving funding from a different county that's not utilizing their YIT budgets. I would be interested though in knowing what county this youth is living in. So I may kind of reach out to that county myself and say, hey, it looks like you're low on YIT. Could we, we can move some money from a different county. Another thing is to keep in mind that counties manage their own budgets. And so they get to decide their priorities, right? And so counties get to decide how they want to use their allocations and as it relates to some of these items. And so some counties may prioritize, open case youth over closed case youth as it relates to some of these items, for example, a vehicle purchase. But that is where I would encourage a youth to reach out to our office and say, like, this is the scenario, because we may just be able to get that county some additional funding to support that youth. But essentially our counties do have the ability to make some judgments on how they spend their budgets.
And did you touch on a little bit, like what is the, maybe I missed it because I was reading, what the turnaround time is?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, so our office does not process YIT. So those are done at the local office. So I can't really tell you or give a turnaround. I would like to hope that we could get things processed in a timely manner within a month and a half. But if the youth is waiting on a request for 2 and 3 months, please have that youth reach out to our YIT policy mailbox. And we can kind of reach out to that county to kind of figure out what's going on. Sometimes it's just, you know, they're kind of, you know, stuck doing some other things and they haven't been able to process it. Sometimes our workers just don't know the process. And so sometimes our office is able to just intervene, but I can't give a definite answer as a turnaround. But essentially, if we have youth waiting like 2 or 3 months, please have them reach out to our office so we can intervene.
I thought I'd do one more question and then we can maybe move on. One thing we can do also is any of these questions we don't get to, we can put an FAQ together and make sure we get all the answers to you in a Word document too. So Carrie, if you can save these somehow and get those to Brandi and I in case we don't hit every question, we can have that out to everybody if that's okay. But I will say, what about a GED recent graduate who is set to enroll for fall? Can he apply for a computer?
I would say he should do it now before he essentially starts school in the fall and he becomes eligible for ETV. Or he starts getting ETV.
Oh, and I'll actually let me do this one real quick. And then as you go on, I might go in and answer some of the other ones that I can easily answer.
Yeah.
Can youth who are ETV eligible use YIT funds to remain in dorms over school breaks until their lifetime housing allowance, or would this be considered a post-secondary expense? And I know we get this, we've started to get this a little bit, so
yeah.
I thought we'd
So Ann and I go back and forth about this one, but I think we ultimately landed on that it's a post-secondary expense, and so that they essentially would need to utilize their ETV to pay for that summer housing on campus, or that break on campus as well. Now, if they are living in an apartment, right, that's something different. But if we're talking about a dorm or a campus, yeah, a campus dorm for the most part, we can't pay for that through YIT.
All right, so I'll have you go on. There's a few other questions that I think I can answer in the chat just so that we keep moving though, if that's okay.
Absolutely. And I'm just on the question from Jessica about indicate a laptop for work. And so we have had counties, you know, definitely, right, in the world that we live in, that youth need laptops for work too. And so that is a youth can request to use YIT to purchase a laptop for work, or, you know, applying for jobs, that sort of thing. We just have to make sure we're not indicating that it's for school, because essentially if we put in a request and a youth is attending one of your institutions and it says that they need it for college, we're not going to be able to process it, because essentially they would have to use their ETV funds. All right, I'll go back. Okay, next slide. Okay, how do youth apply for YIT funding? Next slide. So foster care youth apply for YIT funding 2 ways. So if they have an open case, they should be discussing their need with their foster care worker or their independent living worker. If they have a closed case, it's typically our MYOI coordinators who are processing closed case YIT. They act as our closed case specialists. The funding availability. So if the youth has an open case, their YIT availability is their jurisdiction. So they have to access YIT in the county that has jurisdiction over them. For closed case youth, the funding is available depending on the county that they live in, right? It's based on the county that they live in, not where their foster care case was or originated. So if you have a young person who maybe their foster care case was in Oakland County, their case is now closed and they're residing in Wayne County. Wayne County would be the county to fund their YIT. But if they have an open foster care case, it's that whatever county has jurisdiction. So they may be living in Wayne County, but Macomb has jurisdiction. That means Macomb should fund their YIT. And then for closed case youth, like I said, they don't have an assigned worker, so they would just contact the MYOI coordinator. And I can provide, no, I provided an updated list of all of our MYOI coordinators. Okay, next slide. Okay, do we have any more before we leave YIT? Any more YIT questions I can answer really quickly before we go into MYOI?
Okay, yes. Question: if an open case youth is having difficulty with the private agency in another county, can they choose to have their case transferred or monitored by DHHS?
To my understanding, no. Most of our independent living cases are going to be supervised by a private agency. And so the youth does not get to make that decision about having their case transferred back to MDHHS. However, they can reach out to the monitor on their case. And so that is another option for the young person. And if they don't know who the monitor is, and maybe the private agency won't tell them who the monitor is, me and Ann can look in the system and be able to provide that youth with who the monitor on their case is, because they then just need to contact that monitor and let that monitor know what's going on.
Yes, and there was a question too, and I answered it in the chat about, but I mentioned about reaching out to us, and we can provide the YIT email box, and you'll have both of our email boxes about whether if a youth just needs to know if they're YIT eligible. And I did say that when they're going through an actual applying for YIT, and eligibility is done by the person that's doing it. But if they're just wanting to know, they can reach out to either the YIT email box or you or myself, and we can look them up in our system to say, to let them know whether, yes, they're going to be YIT eligible or not.
Yeah.
Hopefully that's okay.
Right. And we get those emails often as well. Sometimes, you know, young people had their cases closed when they were younger, but potentially they still had like in-home services. So they get kind of confused sometimes where they think that they were in foster care, but really it was an in-home service that was coming out to their home, or a CPS worker, and they thought that it was foster care. Or we have youth that went into guardianships, and so a guardianship worker was coming out. And so we can definitely, you know, help fill in the blanks for young people when they're unsure about their eligibility.
And so just to confirm, an open case college student will apply in their county that their case is open in.
Yes.
And she said, in addition, I have heard people say, wait till you get to college and have a new address to apply in the county where the college is. And I don't know, that's from Jeanette. If you want to explain that a little more for a minute before we move on to MYOI.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it hasn't happened in a while, but I have heard caseworkers say, and students say, oh, you know, I was supposed to wait till I get to college and then apply in Mecosta County. I just think consistency sometimes has been lacking from county to county. And sometimes I think it's because the county may not have funding, so try to get it in the county where you're living. But what you're saying, if it's an open case student from like Wayne or Kent County, they need to apply for funding for the car or other things in the county that their case is open in, right?
Correct. If they have an open case. Even
if they have like a courtesy worker, but their county's still open in another area, right?
Correct. It's the county of the county of jurisdiction. And some counties kind of talk, right? And the county may decide, right? So maybe the youth is living in a different county, and the county of jurisdiction in the county that they're currently living in, they may, you know, the workers may talk and they may say, you know, it's easier for the youth to just access YT in our county because we can help them. And so those conversations happen between counties, but ultimately our policy does say that it's the county of jurisdiction for open.
Yeah, that helps us out tremendously, because I just sent an email to a student about applying for the laptop if he can now before he starts at Ferris, because he's been saying I may get it when I get to Ferris, but excuse me, he might have to use his ETV for other stuff. So okay, thank you.
Yes, and please always feel free to rope, me and me or Ann into it, right?
Okay.
Because sometimes, it's just, translation of policy.
Yeah.
and our workers sometimes not, they're not processing YIT a lot. They just may not know. And so sometimes it's simply us giving them the okay, like, yeah, it's okay to process this request for you.
Well, and I think too, this helps us to work with the students even pre-admission to tap in those county resources while they're still there. And maybe seeing their worker regularly. So, all right. Thank you.
Yeah.
And I would just quickly before you go on, Brandi, is like emphasize reaching out to us in these types of situations. Because I think the same thing we hear for YVAC, different questions when I talk about YVAC is we can look kind of in the system and see maybe where things are at with YVAC and who's the assigned caseworker and where things are at. So I would just say, don't hesitate to reach out to me. And I can't say that I can always fix it because often I can't, but we can at least look into it and make sure that is, if there is anything we can kind of help with. But yeah, I get that was a lot of like YVAC stuff too on my end. So.
All right. So the next couple of slides, we're just going to talk about MYOY. So MYOY is actually one of our programs that we fund our SHAFE, like that's funded through our SHAFE allocation. And so youth eligible in order to be in the MYOY program. And so you may have young people coming to your campuses that are already in MYOY. I think in most cases, I don't know if it happens where you get on campus and they want to then join MYOY. I think in most cases, this is something that they've already been a part of. And so MYOY has been around since 2002, and it is a partnership between the department and the Jim Casey Foundation. And so it started off in Wayne County and a few counties in the northern part of the state. And now it is in every county across the state of Michigan. So we have 42 coordinators. And between the 42 coordinators, they cover every county in the state. And so some of the things that MYOY focuses on is just youth engagement, partnership and resources, research evaluation, public will and policy, and increased opportunities. And so youth who are maybe joining your campuses, they can participate in MYOY. They can also join MYOY. They just need to do so before they turn 23 years old. And so the program is essentially created to help improve the outcomes of young people who are transitioning from foster care to adulthood. So another opportunity for them to learn those independent living skills. I know as you're working with young people, that's definitely something that we have to continue to work with them on, is development of some of these skills and actually kind of putting some of these skills into practice. We hope that we could do some of that before they get to your college campuses, but we know that that's not always the case. And so sometimes I know you guys are intervening with some basic kind of like life skill stuff for our young people. Next slide. Just some components of our MYOY program is our MYOY programs typically have youth leadership boards. So some of your young people may be still a part of some of our youth leadership boards. And essentially our youth leaders are young people who are really wanting to do advocacy work for youth who've experienced foster care. They're interested in doing panels. They're interested in sharing their stories. They're interested in providing their thoughts about how we better the experience of youth in our care. Also, another component is this independent living skills. We really, in MYOY, the coordinators really focus on helping these young people develop independent living skills. Community partnership boards is another big piece. We really depend on making the connections with community partners to help support our young people as they're transitioning. And then banking, stipends, and matches and evaluation. And so if you have young people who are in MYOY, it's quite likely that they have what we call an IDA account. And that is also where we're able to match young people. So where that really has helped young people is as it relates to like a vehicle purchase. So they can access 5,000 from just regular YIT. And if they participate in the MYOI and they saved $1,000, they can then be matched. So essentially that $5,000 turns into $7,000. So if you have young people who are active in MYOI and we don't have to see where that $1,000 came from. We just, if they say, look, I have $1,000 and I want to match that $1,000, they can then get a better car. Same for insurance, right? We can match for a number of some of these high ticket items that the young people are going to be getting. Any questions? I don't think I've seen anything pop up in the chat yet. Okay.
No, nothing about MYOI I see yet.
Okay. And so, 42 coordinators that cover 83 of our all 83 of our counties within the state. Next slide. So what do our coordinators do? So our coordinators, in addition to, like I said, they tend to be, or they are the closed case specialists in each of our county for youth with closed cases. Their role is also to provide assistance and guidance to youth currently and formerly in foster care, aid youth in developing connections and gaining independent and interdependent life skills. They really become our experts for older youth services in our counties. And so they spend a lot of their time also providing technical assistance to our foster care staff. And so when I say that sometimes our staff may just not know the process of accessing YIT, oftentimes I'm connecting the foster care worker with the MYOI coordinator who essentially knows the process, because there's a lot of what they do is in MYOI is doing like YIT request. Coordinate and deliver independent living services. And so I know oftentimes our MYOI coordinators are coming to some of your campuses and they're bringing a group of young people so that they get them interested in learning about post-secondary education. And so that's a part of them coordinating and delivering those independent living services. Also develop community partnerships. So connecting with people in the community to ensure that we have other people at the table to help our young people besides the department. Financial tracking. So they also do get a budget too, in addition to a YIT budget. So many of our coordinators are tracking a YIT budget for their county, and they're tracking their own MYOI budgets. And then the youth advisory boards is another big piece of our MYOI programs. All right, next slide. So just some of the benefits of youth participating in MYOI. So young people get to learn some financial capability skills. So when youth enroll in MYOI, they have to go through a financial literacy training curriculum. And this curriculum was actually created with youth and it's specific to youth who have experienced foster care. And so a big piece of it is teaching those financial literacy, teaching them about financial literacy. Young people gain confidence because they are saving. Potentially when they're attending these meetings, they're paid for every meeting that they attend within MYOI. And so kind of our old school way was that we used to set up 2 accounts for young people. We used to say, open up a savings account and then an IDA account. And the youth did not have access to the IDA account. So it's, we will see, I just actually approved a request yesterday where a youth had $4,000 saved in their IDA account. And they were taking $1,000 of that out to match for a vehicle purchase. So it's a lot of benefits as it relates to young people financially for participating in MYOI, in addition to them learning some independent living skills. And so they get to save for an asset that they want in the future that's going to really help them with school or work or their education, right? So if they are participating in MYOI and they're saving money, right, they can maybe pay for books if they don't have enough ETV, or if their ETV had to go towards tuition. And then young people form relationships with their peers. And we know that that's kind of a big piece for our young people, right? Their experiences, while their experiences are unique to them, their peers will not understand, right? Their non-foster care peers won't understand the experience or dynamic of what being in a child welfare system looks like. And so youth get to develop these relationships with other young people who've had similar experiences. All right, next slide. Okay, this is just, again, just talking a little bit more about MYOI and some of the training opportunities that we focus on, being that of education, employment, housing, physical and mental health, permanency, and social and community connections. And so, like I said, I know many of our coordinators reach out to do campus, campus tours and such, and that kind of falls into like us focusing on education. And I've already talked about youth having to complete a financial literacy training. Once they are, in order to become enrolled in the program, they complete that first. And then I've already talked about the youth advisory boards. So I think the next slide, Anne will be taking over. Unless we have any questions about MYOI before Anne takes over, or anything you thought of about YIT.
Yeah, I didn't see anything so far. We can give it a second. And also, Brandi, if you want to go back through the chat, and I think we either answered everything live or I answered it, but if you want to go scroll back and just, if there is anything specifically that you would be able to touch on that maybe I missed. I was trying to kind of keep them organized.
Okay.
So there's a question in there about some driving training hours, and I'm going to touch a little bit on that. So I didn't answer that yet, but
Okay. All right, sounds good.
All right, then I will go ahead and great questions though. I'm actually, I knew we could probably have like the full 2 hours just on YIT. So really good questions, and hopefully those of you that maybe are newer are getting some information even from the questions from your peers that are like have had some issues in the past. So, but I'm gonna like kind of switch gears completely, and I'm not going to talk about money. So I'm not going to talk about as much like the fun piece of money of YIT at first. I'm going to first hit on a few policy required meetings that our workers are to have with our older youth. Now, these are obviously meetings that you would be facilitating, but I think in your role, you probably work with a lot of students that still have open foster cases. So they still, maybe they're in YVAC, or maybe they haven't yet entered YVAC and they're just, under their regular foster care case. And so these meetings may be happening, and you may not be, you maybe have never heard of these meetings. But now that you'll know about them, you may reach out to a caseworker and say, when's the next semi-annual transition meeting? Can I be invited? So I just think it's important in your role to just know these meetings are happening, and maybe there's information you can provide that would help. So first is the semi-annual transition meeting. So this is a specific, I guess, let me go back. In Michigan, we have family team meetings, FTMs, and team decision-making meetings, TDMs. So if you're working with caseworkers, you will hear the terms FTMs and TDM meetings throughout the life of a case. These are required meetings, kind of like case conferences. They are opportunities for us to bring together the families and whoever the family sees as a support, discuss whatever's going on at the case at that time. So there's very specific times that FTMs are held throughout the life of a case, from the time kids enter care until they close, either with reunification or adoption. These FTMs are happening at different points. The two meetings I'm going to talk about today are specific meetings for our older youth. So semi-annual transition meetings should be occurring after a kid turns 14 and they're in care every 6 months to discuss a youth's permanency plan, identify supportive adults, and make plans to meet specific goals set by the group. So we're talking about, when I say permanency plan, we are like, what are we doing? Are we moving towards an adoption? Are we moving towards a kid entering YVAC eventually? Like, what is the long-term plan for this teenager? We're also identifying those supportive adults who the youth and the family that's involved consider supports to this young person. Now, a couple of your handouts that we will have, and I don't know if they went out yet or not, but we will provide some forms that go along with these meetings. So a 901, you will get the 901. There'll be two of those, a 901A and a 901B forms. They are the documents that are supposed to be filled out with these meetings. So the 901 is for our 14 to 16-year-olds, and the 901B is for those older youth, like 17 to age 21. Once we started allowing you to remain in care until 21, we really, determined that what we're meeting about at the age of 14 is very different than what we should be talking about when we're talking to a 20-year-old and having these meetings. So we separated those out. But those are pretty lengthy forms if you've ever been to one of these and seen these forms. And it's going through all of the different like life domains that you guys are all familiar with in talking to the youth about what goals we need to set in these different areas regarding housing, regarding budgeting, regarding education. If it's a high school senior, putting on there that we need to get the FAFSA done, that we need to talk to different colleges. So we're making a plan during that meeting in these different areas of what needs to be done between now and the next time we have another semi-annual transition meeting. So it's really specific on what should be happening is, okay, what is the goal in this area and who's going to help this student do it? So for example, the driver's training, kid needs to take driver's training. Okay, by the time we come back in 6 months, who's going to help this student get enrolled in driver's training courses? How are we going to pay for it? Who's going to do that? So again, I think it's important for you all to know that because some of your youth with open cases, they'll be having these meetings and you can go to them and provide information on how the student is doing in your program, what you think maybe the student could benefit from. Now the youth has to allow you to come. You can ask the student says, well, I don't really want you there. So you have to be, it has to be approved by the youth to come. But I just think it's important. And hopefully some of you that have been in this role have at least heard of this term of the semi-annual transition meeting. But if you can go to the next one, is the 90-day discharge meeting. So this is for any of our youth that are leaving care after the age of 16 need to have, again, this very specific family team meeting, FTM, of a 90-day discharge meeting. And the idea is that you've been having these semi-annual transition meetings every 6 months, and it's really going to feed in to this 90-day discharge. So now student is turning 21, foster care case is going to be closed. What are the gaps we haven't done yet? So that driver's training, kid finally got his driver's license. Now let's look at maybe he needs a car. What should we do? Can we apply for do we have time to apply for YIT? Can we look at accessing something for the purchase of a car or insurance? So the 90-day is meant to kind of be that, okay, this last step, what are these last things we need to do before this student is now no longer going to be in foster care at all. We talk a lot about discharge documents in those because policy requires that our youth, when they leave care, if they're leaving care as a teenager, that they have their birth certificate, that they have their social security card, that they have their verification of foster care for financial aid, that for the 945 that you guys use for your financial aid offices. That they have their medical passport, which is our document that kind of shows all of their medical history while during their time in care. That they have their immunization record. So it is, again, policy that our kids are being provided all of these documents when they leave care so that they aren't leaving them and then they're trying to get a driver's license. They don't have their birth certificate. They don't have any of these things to get these things done. If you can go to the next one. So the semi-annual and these 90-day discharge meetings, and when we train caseworkers, I say I cannot emphasize enough that these are meant to be youth-led meetings that brings together the people that these young people see as their supports. These are not meant to be at a home, a 901 is not meant to be filled out at a home visit with a young person between just the young person and the worker. These are meant to be family team meetings, and the youth should be able to invite the people they see as support. So here's the list here that it's not even an exhaustive list of showing who may be at these meetings. So biological parents, foster parents, any other relatives that are involved, your CASAs, your lawyers, a lot of time MYOI coordinators may be invited. The youth's friends, the youth's boyfriend or girlfriend, and maybe their parents, they could be a support to this student. School staff, so you guys as coaches or foster care liaisons, if they're still in the K-12 system, maybe somebody with a counselor or somebody at their high school that they see as a support. employers, anybody, again, that the youth sees as a support, tribal representatives, if they're part of a tribe, and just anyone that the youth says, I want them there. They are part of my team. But I just want to emphasize that this should be youth led. And you should even be, they should even be talking about in these meetings what the youth sees as kind of their important thing to do between now and the next semi-annual transition meeting. And so if you're there as a coach, you can provide some really good feedback, some really good support to the youth and the other people on the team. So hopefully some of you have been invited to some of these, or at least now you can kind of bring it up to a caseworker and ask when the next semi-annual is held. Could I be invited? Is there any information that I could provide for the next meeting? Any questions on that? I don't think so. So our young adult voluntary foster care. So those of you that are new, I've been saying like this term YVAC, and and so this is what we're talking about when we are talking about our YVAC program. So it's our young adult voluntary foster care program. Michigan allows youth to stay in foster care up until the 21st birthday under our YVAC program. So this opened up, we started this back in 2013. Because federal legislation changed and we were allowed to get some federal funding to allow for this to occur. So it is voluntary. So youth can opt out when they get to the point that they could enter. Youth can enter after the age of 18. I will say this is still a foster care case. There sometimes is confusion over whether this is still like a foster care case. In most aspects, it is still a foster care case. They are still under DHHS care and supervision. They still have a caseworker. The things that make it different from what before a youth enters YVAC is there's no court involvement. And there's more strict requirements to meet eligibility in order to stay in YVAC. And so I'll talk about that more. But in general, our youth have to be either working, in school, volunteering, or have some kind of medical condition that does not allow them to do any of those things. So I'll talk about that in a second. Most of our youth that are in YVAC are in what we call an independent living placement. And so that would include dorms at any of your institutions. So in most cases, a youth that's in YVAC in a dorm at MSU, they're going to be considered an independent living placement. So they are receiving the payment of $25.52 in a daily stipend that they receive while they're in YVAC. We do have some youth in YVAC that may be in a foster home. And then in that case, the foster parent can still get that payment as they would before a youth enters YVAC. But the high majority of our YVAC kids, I would say, are in an independent living placement, kind of living on their own, either in an apartment or in a dorm, and receiving that stipend themselves. Youth can leave and re-enter until the 21st birthday. And I think that's where you all can come in because you may have a student that comes into your office that says they close, their foster care case closes at 18 and they say, well, I didn't know I could enter YVAC. They can then enter. If they're only 20 and they say, I was open at 18, I closed at 18 and nobody told me about YVAC. Maybe they say, nobody told me about YVAC. And they're only 20, then they can get connected now and enter now. It doesn't mean that if they chose not to just enter at 18 that they can never enter. They can actually enter at 18 and say they don't want to be in it anymore and close and then re-enter 6 months later again. So they can kind of come in and out until that 21st birthday. But I think you guys can be a really good catch-all of for those students that maybe, they don't think they were told about YVAC, or they maybe weren't meeting requirements to enter at the time. And now if they're registering at your institution, they're definitely meeting that requirement. So there is, as I said, there's no ongoing court involvement for youth in YVAC, but they are still under our supervision as DHHS. So there's still wards of the state under us. There's just no longer any court involvement. So that's what makes it a little different from like your foster care cases before they enter YVAC. So you can go to the next one. Do you want me to answer? Oh wait. I see semi is good time. Yes. Thank you, Brandi. Semi-annual meetings are a good time to also discuss YIT for needs for youth for sure. Do they contact their local office to reopen? So that is a good question. So yes, they can either, if they come to your office and if it's recent enough where they remember their caseworker and they want to contact their old caseworker, or their old, whether it was at a private agency or at a DHH office, they can try that first if they'd like, because oftentimes that same county or that same agency will reopen it in YVAC if there's still kind of a relationship, some, youth engagement there. If they don't, remember who their worker was, or it's been so long and they'd rather not do that, they would then contact where they're living. So now they're living in Washtenaw County, even though their case was somewhere else. They've been closed for a year. Now they could contact where the Washtenaw County YVAC contact person and get enrolled that way. Either county can actually open them. At central office, we say, as long as somebody opens them, either county can open them. So it just depends on kind of the situation. How would we know if they're in YVAC? Typically a student's going to be they're going to know that they're in YVAC. They've signed a lot of paperwork. They signed an agreement to enter YVAC that's saying what the requirements are. So a student is going to know typically if they've entered YVAC or not. So these are the program requirements that I mentioned. So they have to be either, like I said, either in school or working. Basically, they need to be doing something, productive with their time. So they could be in high school or in a GED preparation course. And then we do not require a minimum level of attendance or GPA for that. But if they're still in high school, if they're 18 and they're a senior in high school and they want to enter, they're a senior, that would be meeting the eligibility requirements. For college, they would need to be enrolled at least part-time in either university, vocational program, or trade school. And again, we cannot require a minimum level of attendance or GPA. So this is sometimes, workers sometimes have an issue with this because technically if a student enrolls and 3 weeks in does not drop, but does not attend anymore, they're still continuing to be eligible for YVAC until the end of the semester, unless the institution has actually dropped them from courses. So if they choose not to attend, and they're still enrolled until the end of the semester, then they would be eligible until basically the day after the last day of that semester. But they do remain eligible, even if they've said, even if they're, I'm not going, and the coach, as a coach, they're not going, if they're still considered enrolled by the institution, they'd remain eligible until the end of that semester. Go ahead to the next slide. So for our students, obviously, if our kids are in your institutions, they're going to be eligible, and there really isn't. We say part-time, we don't say half-time, we say part-time. So technically a student could be eligible just by being enrolled in like one course. But if they're not, and you're still maybe having some contact with a student for that semester after they stop out, they could remain eligible for YVAC if they get a job and they're working 80 hours per month, which is technically part-time. So they need to have 80 hours of employment or 80 hours of participating in some kind of job employment program to meet that requirement, or volunteering. They could be volunteering for some kind of community organization, again, for that 80 hours a month. And they could do that in a collaboration. So they could have two part-time jobs where that gets them to the 80 hours. They could have a job and they're not going to get 80 hours. So they go find some volunteer work to get the last few hours in the month. We have, students that are kids that actually do that. So as long as, and the caseworker is responsible for looking at every month, is there 80 hours of either work or volunteer time? Because once they don't, they have to they're no longer meeting those requirements, even if they got to like 72 hours. So it is really important that our students know they have to have that 80 hours. And then, or they may be incapable of meeting the school or work requirements if they do have a documented medical condition. And so we do have some of those situations, or even if it's like a temporary medical condition. Recently we had somebody that had been in an accident and had some physical injuries that he had a job, but he was not able to go back to the job for so many months. So we have a doctor's note that says this is when he'd be able to return to like physical activity. And so he was meeting that medical requirement until the last day of that medical note. I do have a YVAC. There's a question, is there a list of YVAC contacts? I do have a sheet that shows kind of our points of contact in counties for students who are closed and don't have a contact. So I can get that out. So I think somebody's maybe off mute, Carrie, I don't know. Or maybe I'm just hearing some background noise, but you can go to the next slide. I don't know if there's other questions about YVAC. Oh, wait.
I did have a question, Ann, and I was trying to see if there was a raised hand, if I can ask you about. And I noticed a couple of students, one in particular who, and I'm not sure if she's in YVAC or not, but she's enrolled 3 times. Well, she's registered for classes 3 times, and she never finishes the classes, and she has a very, very low GPA. And this last time we had adult resources center pay for her classes, and she still didn't do it again. I'm wondering, is she basically abusing the system because she getting this YVAC, or maybe she knows this about YVAC and I don't know. So while I'm advocating for her, and then she goes MIA. So I'm try to reach her, I reach out to her, and there's no response. So, and this, like I said, this is the 3rd time. So I'm wondering, are you finding that it happens, or is that a possibility that will happen? Or could I find out if she is in YVAC and maybe getting those funds?
And yeah, you can, I mean, once you know if she's in YVAC, you can always reach out to the caseworker if you know who that is too, but I can look it up. But technically, like we said, there is not in our policy a requirement of attendance or GPA. So, we would, if you know who the worker is, that is something you could discuss with the workers. If she keeps dropping classes, she's not going to be eligible for some of these other resources we're going to talk about. But the rule as of now with YVAC is if she's enrolled, if this institution considers her enrolled, she would remain in YVAC until she's no longer considered enrolled. If they dropped her, that would be a different story because you'd go by the drop date, but but yeah, and this will be grace periods, and I guess this might go a little bit to what you're talking about, because it sounds like this youth may have been in and out of grace periods if she's in YVAC. And so this grace period is very specific to YVAC. This is not going to be your other kids that have a regular foster care case that are in an independent living. This is only going to be your kids that are specifically in YVAC for grace period. So in Michigan, and we're one of the few states that allows this grace period piece, is that we allow youth to stay in YVAC and receive all services and funding for 30 days after they are no longer meeting those work school requirements. So in the case of, and so they would have a 30-day grace period to reestablish eligibility. So a student that, finished fall semester and semester ended December 18th, and there's no plan for them to be enrolled back in school in January, and not working and, meeting no other requirements, then their grace period would start the day after those classes end. And so they would have 30 days to reestablish, either decide to get back enrolled in school or find employment or do some volunteer work to do that. So, payment services are all provided during that 30 days. In most states, from my understanding, is if a youth quits their job on the 5th, their case is closed on the 6th. With us, kid quits their job on the 5th, they enter a grace period on the 6th, and we allow for 30 days. And hopefully the caseworker is able to help them with deciding to find other employment, to find some volunteer work, or get enrolled in some kind of education program. So we allow for 3 grace periods per year, so per fiscal year, but they can't be like one right after another. It's not like you can't have a 90-day grace period. But we do allow for those grace periods. So that kid that decided not to come back in January, their grace period starting towards the end of December, and then by the first week of January, they do decide to enroll somewhere, they'd come out of that grace period once they get enrolled in the new school, or once they find the employment that's going to show documentation that they're going to be getting 80 hours per month. If they're still not meeting requirements, so that kid that isn't coming back 30 days from December 18th, 30 days from that is, their case would close on the 31st day. And there's an FTM that's held, and the youth is notified that their case is closing. And then with the option of knowing that they can still come back later. So again, like, they close because they're not meeting requirements after that grace period, and 2 months later they get a job, they can then come back and re-enter the YVAC program at that point. So that was my last, I think, YVAC slide. Are there any questions about? No, there's no, YVAC is not based on income, and they receive, the stipend they receive is the daily stipend of, it's on the one slide, 25 something a day. So no, we're not, eligibility to enter. So if the kid is meeting, maybe the kid's not going to school, but they're meeting work requirements for YVAC, they could be making more than I'm making, and they'd still be eligible for YVAC. All right, I think we can go on if. I did want to mention foster care transitional Medicaid. This sometimes comes up. So our youth, and we say FICTMA, foster care transitional Medicaid, because we love our acronyms at DHHS. Our FICMA program is established for youth who transition out of foster care after the age of 18. So they did have to be in care on the 18th birthday in order to have FICMA, and then they have this till the 26th birthday. This should be an automatic referral by the caseworker at the time of case closing. So this should not be, unless there's some exception, and I know sometimes there is, but this should not be something that a youth has to do at the time of their case closure. So if a youth is in YVAC and stays open until 21, and when their case closes on their 21st birthday, they're automatically getting this referral in the computer system to the FICMA program to then have that transitional Medicaid until the 26th birthday. The only thing they are really responsible for is to make sure that whoever their Medicaid worker has their up-to-date address. And so this is important with probably some of you that have students that go from either community college to a university in another county, or maybe have come to you and it doesn't work out, and now they're going to move back to their home county, to make sure that maybe you mention, oh, you're moving back, make sure your address is up to date in that system, because that's the one thing it's really the only thing that a youth has responsibility for, should have responsibility for their FICMA. So I have here just, benefits, what's included with that Medicaid when they have that. As of January 1st of this year, there was also a change federally, and those of you that were around in January, February got some information from me about this, is that now youth who are in care in another state are now eligible for FICMA. And I thought I had more information that I can provide possibly in information. I will say this is Medicaid is not something that's under Brandi and I's purview for sure. But I think it is important for you all to know. And I know you guys get some out-of-state students. So it would be helpful for some of those students to know they're now in Michigan, they were in care in Texas, and now they're eligible to receive our FICMA, which before January 1st of this year, they were not. I do have a link here though with some frequently asked questions too, because again, this is Brandi and I, this is not under our unit. It's under a unit that's kind of sits next to us. So we can get you answers to those. If you do have issues with those, you know, reach out to me and I can get you in touch with one of the people on that unit that could do that. Oh, there's a question. Is FICMA? FICMA would be in bridges. It's just a certain type of Medicaid. So what happens is when that case is closing, that's all kind of happening behind the scenes within that bridges system. But yes, it's all, I mean, Medicaid, FICMA is a form of regular Medicaid. Prior to that, while kids are open, they have like foster care Medicaid. It's a specific flag of foster care Medicaid. So currently we do not allow for will the youth from another state be eligible for YVAC. Now this is different. We do not allow youth to come to Michigan and open under YVAC if their foster care case was in another state. So just to be clear on that, so you have a student that's coming to U of M and they say, well, I was in foster care, but I was in foster care in Kentucky, and they're only 18 or 19 years old. They cannot enter our YVAC program. They could come to us and still have their extension program if they're a state that has an extension program, but they are not going to be eligible to open under our YVAC program.
There was a question about YIT. And so for youth who are from another state, as long as they were in that state's foster care system after their 14th birthday under a court jurisdiction, then yes, they will be eligible for YIT. And so it's up to that young person to provide us those documents. So they may provide the court order, or they may provide some form from their state indicating that they were in care after 14 and that they are SHAFE eligible. But it is up to the youth to have those documents to provide us, but they are eligible for SHAFE funding. And then I think you have another question. And if the question says, I have a student who kept getting rejected for Medicaid. He made more money than me. He had tons of medical bills. We contacted the FICMA in Lansing and she helped him get enrolled. Oh, okay. Well, thank you for sharing that.
That is, we can, we'll get in touch with the person that's over that if there's things like that, but we are definitely not the experts in that area. Maybe Brandi is, but I'm not. All right, then I think we'll move on. Just to our the state identification requirement. So we do have a requirement in our policy, and I think this came down from federal legislation several years ago, that we make sure that our youth who are not getting driver's licenses leave care, if they're leaving care after the age of 16, that they at least have are like a state ID. So our youth should not be leaving care without either a driver's license or a photo state ID from the Secretary of State. So this has consistently been an issue. I was a foster care worker in 2001, and it was so frustrating because a lot of times we didn't have the documentation when you go into the Secretary of State that allowed us to get the state ID. So maybe we don't yet have like the birth certificate or, you know, what a social security card or whatever we needed. And it was always very frustrating. Our office, Brandi and I in our office, we've collaborated for the last few years now with the Secretary of State, the Department of State, to address some of these barriers for our young people with getting both state ID and driver's licenses. And so there's been a few things that have come up with that I think has been helpful and that we've put out in communication to our staff in local offices. And one is that social security number. that the Secretary of State offices have been told that they can take a printout of our MySACWIS, which is our case management system. They can take a printout of the Social Security number from that in lieu of a Social Security card. So if a foster care caseworker is going in with that young person, they can have that with them to show if we don't yet have a Social Security card to show. The other piece is residency. This may not be as much of an issue for students that are on college campuses because they're probably getting mail and stuff. They may have information with their address and stuff, but I remember for our like 16-year-olds, sometimes a kid that's in a foster home doesn't have a way to verify that residency. They don't have a bill in their name. They don't have something they can take in. So the other thing is Secretary of State offices have been told they can take a letter from caseworkers to verify that residency. The other thing that I took off of here that was developed was a payment voucher form that we can take in to provide the Secretary of State that payment will be made for that, for the ID. And Brandi, if you were part of that, am I saying it was a payment voucher, right? That a caseworker can take in to say that like YIT is then going to pay for that?
Yes, it is. And so it's a newer process. So I know like a lot of our MYOI coordinators are familiar with the process, but the foster care, some of the foster care specialists may not be familiar, but there is a form that we can utilize if youth is YT eligible to cover the costs associated with that.
Yeah, and Brandi Thompson in the chat said she had a student that took 6 months to get the ID and payment was the primary issue. And if so, they were an open foster care case and had like a caseworker, that could have been something that that payment voucher they could have gone in with them with that payment voucher to say this kid's in foster care and they're YIT eligible and payment will be made that way. So that is definitely a newer process. And as we know, newer processes take a while to get kind of set up. The other piece that I know there was a question earlier, because this is about the driver's training piece. So Brandi did talk about like YIT. I think she talked about YIT can pay for driver's training and kind of the cost of getting, you know, your permit and your license and everything you have to go in there. And I think the question earlier was about driving hours, because that's another issue that we have. Some of our students that are maybe they're in IL and they don't have like a caregiver that can help them get their practice hours in. Or we have some foster parents that have the concern about like their insurance going up. Can they let a kid drive their car? So our kids sometimes don't have the ability to get those driving practice hours in to then go and officially get their license. And so what we often see is our kids then just wait until 18 and just go get their license and take the test and go get their license. And then they're not really maybe prepared to be driving. But so we do have some funding that we recently got. There's some parameters around it, but we do have some funding if you have an open case foster youth where we can, it's aside from YIT, but it is some funding that if they're an open case, we can pay for if you find a company that's willing. And I know there's companies that are willing to, that do practice hours with our kids. And it's very expensive. I think for the full, it can be up to like $5,000. And we have some funding for that. So get in touch with me and I can kind of get you more information about that, because I didn't put that on a slide. So I apologize. But again, it has to be a student with an open foster care case that's looking to pay one of those driving companies to get those practice hours in. And then I can get you the information that you would kind of how to get that started. But that's a little bit of information. Again, I apologize. I don't have more of that information right on this slide. It's a fairly new kind of process. We've only done a few of them so far, but there's money there. But they have to be open foster care cases. For closed case driving hours, I mean, you could possibly, and I hate to say, you know, if there is some, as Brandi said, we utilize most of our YIT. So, you know, you wouldn't probably be able to use a lot of YIT, but if there is a county that, I mean, it would be eligible for that. But I don't know of another funding source for closed case youth to help with those driving hours. Brandi, do you have any suggestions?
No, like Anne mentioned, like we can't typically pay for 50 hours, but
Yeah.
we may make some exceptions for some of them, but outside of YIT, making an exception with YIT, I don't know of any other funding sources for closed case youth.
Yeah, and it is, I mean, we have a lot, like I said, I think we have a lot of youth that don't get those, don't have a way to get the hours in. So then they just wait at 18 and go get the test. It's like, I haven't, I've had some students who aren't getting YIT approved for driver's training. They could use their ETV. Yeah, they could use that. Is the YIT funding going to continue to be county by county decisions? Yes, that I don't see that would ever change. And yes, like $70 an hour. Yes, it's very expensive. And I don't know, what do they need, like 40 hours? I don't know what it is, but it's very expensive. So, all right, if you can go to the next slide. I have just a few of these slides that I'll try to go through quickly, because I think as coaches, you guys know a lot of this information already, but I wanted to include it because it is specifically, resources for our older youth. So I think it's important to include. And this first is, making sure obviously that our kids do the FAFSA. Like, of course, we want all our kids to do the FAFSA, but really saying that that they answer that question about being in foster care after the age of 13. So that they are filing as independent students. So I think it's still question 53. I know there's updates to the FAFSA going, so it may end up being a different question, but it's the question about if you were in a foster care after the 13th birthday. And then oftentimes a lot of your schools need that verification form. Because if they get pulled for verification, it's like, okay, you said you were in foster care after 13, now prove it. And so the 945 is a verification form. That I do a lot of these. This is one of those things that was on that discharge document list though. So technically caseworkers should be doing these and providing these to youth if their cases have closed. But if they're an open case, a foster care worker can do this for your students. But if they are closed and there's no contact that they have with the foster care staff, you can reach out to me and I can do these and complete this for your financial aid. And it's just saying, yes, this student was in foster care after the age of 13, and that's usually enough for students to then be filed as an independent student. And I know you guys all know how important that is for our youth, because then they get the fullest Pell Grant. So go ahead. The tuition incentive program tip. So this is, I think really the only thing we're talking about today that is not specifically goes through, it's not really administered in any way really by like our office or by DHHS, although it is based on Medicaid. So the TIP program is, and most of our youth that you're going to be serving in your programs are going to be TIP eligible because again, they had foster care Medicaid while they were in foster care. So if they had Medicaid for 24 months in a 36 consecutive month period after the age of 9, because that's not complicated to figure out, then they're going to be eligible for TIP. And so phase 1 TIP is more for our students that are going to a community college or a school that's having them work towards an associate's degree. And then phase 2 will pick up in that usually that 3rd and 4th year, working towards a bachelor's degree. Again, youth in foster care automatically are put on Medicaid. So oftentimes they were in care after the age of 9 and they had Medicaid for 2 years. So if they had Medicaid for 2 years after the age of 9, then they should be TIP eligible. And TIP is a Michigan only program. So that's going to only be for your Michigan colleges and university. And yes, Ferris State is a phase 1. So there are a few universities that are phase 1 and phase 2 schools. There's a really good fact sheet on that on the Department of Treasury website that has all the breakdowns of what schools are TIP phase 1 and what schools are TIP phase 2. But I'm sure you all know what you are. So go ahead. the education and training voucher, ETV. So this, as Brandi talked about, our Chafee money. So we get an allocation of Chafee money, and part of it goes into like what we call YIT. So the counties, and we put some into contracts, and you know, a handful of, you know, we have some employment programs. And then the other piece is the ETV program. And so Samaritas administers our ETV program for the state. And that is up to $5,000 per year for college and living expenses. So ETV, while YIT is helping, you know, age 14 and up, ETV is very specific to youth that are in college, and this should be going to things that are college related. So whether that's tuition or living expenses that have to do with keeping a kid in school. I know, so I provided you with the link and the link to the application. You can start the application online in the phone number there. Youth had to be in care after the 14th birthday. What changes with the ETV, and it gets confusing for people when you're kind of first starting this work, is that if there was an adoption or a guardianship from foster care, that had to be after the 16th birthday in order to be eligible for ETV. And I will just say, all of these things have their like really crazy eligibility requirements and age requirements. Reach out to me, especially about these college things. Reach out to me if you have questions or you have a student that you want looked up. I can look them up and tell you pretty easily what they're going to be eligible for and what they won't based on their time in care. Because if you're newer to this, it's kind of makes your brain spin. So I can always look up somebody and let you know pretty easily if they're, you know, YIT eligible compared to ETV eligible compared to fostering futures. So, and I think the next slide, if you can go, that'll be the fostering futures possibly. And I think this is our last financial resource. So this is a scholarship. This is going to be also a Michigan program for Michigan students going to Michigan colleges. And the requirement for this is students have been in care after the 13th birthday. There is no upper age limit on fostering futures. Like most of our other resources, there's upper age limits. We have students that apply for fostering futures that are in their 40s and 50s. And so if they can show proof that they were in care after the 13th birthday in Michigan, under Michigan's care and supervision, then they are eligible to get. Does kind of always part of fostering futures is that charitable contribution, as some of you know, that have gone to like either the pizza party or the different dinner events. All of that's made at the pizza party, all of that's made at the dinner events in Grand Rapids and the Detroit area goes directly to scholarships. So we kind of always have to look, if we have less, those award amounts from $3,000 a year may have to be lowered if we have lower in the future. Right now, I think we're good for this coming year to be $3,000. The priority deadline for this is August 1st, not that typo, and for the following school year. So that's coming up pretty fast if you have students that need to apply. But that's just a priority deadline. They take the applications after that. And most will be awarded, but it is important to try to get it as close to that date as possible. And then I did give you the link to that application for this coming year. I hope I didn't cut out because it said my internet was wonky. Oh,
You did just for a second. But you're okay now. I pulled the slides down, but do you want me to put them back up? Do you have more? Because you said that was the last slide, I thought.
no, that was last mine, but
Oh,
Brandi, so
sorry.
I wanted to make sure that Brandi had a good 15 minutes at least to do night. She's going to finish up. I don't see any other questions for me, but I'll be here if other questions get put in about any of my stuff. I think this is my last slide. I think it goes into night and next, and I'll let Brandi come back. Yeah.
Yes. So just want to kind of briefly talk about NIDED a little bit. And so some of you may have never heard of NIDED. If you've been in the world of foster care before, you may be familiar with NIDED, but NIDED is the National Youth and Transition Database. And so each state, each state receive federal funding, thus we have to comply with some requirements, and one of those is the National Youth and Transition Database. And our funding is also, we could lose funding if we were found to not be in compliant with the requirement. And so NIDED collects data for youth who are in foster care. And so services, there's two pieces of NIDED. So one is a survey that the youth actually, in a specific cohort, is asked to complete the survey. So they complete the survey if they're in the cohort at 17. And then we follow up with those same youth again at 19 and then again at 21. And so that's one piece of the NIDED database data collection. The other piece of it is our services. And so all of the things that we've kind of talked about in terms of YIT, the campus support programs themselves, we enter that into our MySACWIS system. And so those are counted as services that our young people are receiving. And then we report that information every 6 months to the federal government, and then they find that we're either compliant or not compliant, and then they provide us kind of a snapshot of where we are and as it relates to providing services for young people and outcomes of young people. So we're able through just this process to get some helpful information about the effectiveness of our system based on the young people's answers to the survey about, and that's how we kind of determine some of the outcomes of our young people. Next slide. So this is our a full cohort, which means we surveyed these youth at 17, 19, and 21. We are actually at a baseline right now. So this year we are surveying 17-year-olds. And so the cohort is decided based on a young person's birthday. And so they had to be 17 within a certain time period to be eligible to complete this survey. So we're currently in a baseline year. Next year, I believe, or next fiscal year, it's off a fiscal year, I believe we will be surveying the 21-year-olds. So we'll get another completed cohort. So this is our most recent completed cohort. And so this is just the data showing youth who received services, right? And so you'll see post-secondary education support. So of course, for in 2017, these youth were 17. So the answer, well, the percentage was 0. In 2018, 1%. And then you'll see that it kind of, it goes up in 2019. I'm assuming because of the pandemic, we're at kind of the 1%. And so, or that we kind of geared off to the 1%. And this is based on information entered into our MySACWIS system. So we know that this is not really 100% accurate. It's only as good as the information that's entered into the system. But that is just one category, academic support. So it looks like in 2017, which our youth are then at that point in high school, or for our 17-year-olds they're in high school, looks like they got a little more academic support. And then as time goes on, they were less academic support was entered into our system. And that's because we're not capturing some of the like post-secondary work, or also, you know, we know that we don't have a large percentage of young people even seeking post-secondary education. Another piece is the employment program of vocational training. So we're seeing that, you know, the percentages for that. Educational financial assistance. So we try to enter all the youth that receive ETV. We're entering that into our MySACWIS system so that we're able to show that we're providing some educational financial assistance to young people. Actually, that might be under, no, I don't think it's under other financial assistance. I think that falls into the education financial assistance. And then mentoring. So I believe, and we enter our campus support programs under mentoring.
Yes.
Okay. So the numbers of our would be reflective under mentoring. And so in some of these areas, we know that we're providing more of these services that our numbers actually are reflecting. And so not that it's anything you guys could do outside of communicating with caseworkers when you're able to about some of the services that young people are receiving at your institutions, that they may be able to add case services for. So this is just a kind of a snapshot of the services that we're providing. Next slide. The next slide is based on young people's answers to the survey questions. And so you'll see it broken down into 17, the 19, and the 21-year-olds. So you'll see at 17, of course, you know, our young people are not having associate's or bachelor's degrees at that point, but you'll see that at 17, 5% of our young people reported that they have completed high school or got a GED. And then you see that that goes up to 51% at 19, right? Because we know many of our young people graduated in that 5 or 6 year cohort. And then at 21, we have 63% of our young people reporting that they have high school diploma or GED. And when you go down to just higher degrees beyond that, at 21, we have 1% of our young people, a young person indicating that they have a higher degree. And then it just breaks it down how many youth are currently enrolled in attending school. So at 17, we have almost 100% of our young people attending school. And then at 19, just about half of those youth. And then at 21, we have 30% of those youth who are indicating that they're currently enrolled or attending school. Next slide. This breaks down just some more data that we have. So it asks about whether or not youth are employed. So you'll see numbers of our youth employment from 17, 19, and 21. So you can see at 21, 33% of the youth indicated they were working full time. 25 of those youth indicated that they were working part-time. So we have, just over, about 60%, almost 60% of our young people are working. And so then that kind of leads us to wonder if they're not working and they're not in post-secondary education, we have potentially close to 40% of our young people that we are not sure kind of what they're doing in terms of making a living for themselves. It asks about educational aid. So it does ask like if they're receiving financial assistance for school in terms of like stipends or scholarships and things of those sorts. It asks about public assistance, it asks about public housing, how many of our youth are receiving Social Security, how many of our youth have a connection to an adult. And we essentially do we have really good numbers as it relates to our young people indicating that they have connections to supportive adults. Homelessness, that is another area that we see our young people are really battling with homelessness. As you can see, of course, at 17, all of our youth are still in foster care, so none of them are homeless. Then you see at 19, they may or may not be in foster care, and so we have 24%, but then you see from 19 to 21, we have 33% of our youth indicating that they've been homeless or that they are homeless. Same thing kind of for incarcerations. You'll see that number from 17 to 19 increases, but actually between 19 and 21, it decreases. What else did I want to point out? Another thing is just about Medicaid. A lot of our young people don't understand that they have Medicaid, so they're 26 if they were in care at 18. So Ann talked about FSM, and just now that you have an understanding of FSM, you could kind of help our young people who were in care at 18 understand that they do have medical insurance, which also comes with, the ability for them to, go see a therapist, to get the prescriptions that they need, also to get dental needs met. So just helping our young people understand that they have Medicaid and that they have health insurance. You also see another thing I want to point out is our youth who indicate pregnant or parenting. So at 17, for this particular cohort, we had none of our 17-year-olds indicated they had children. And then at 19, it was 12%, and then it goes to 27. I'm sorry, to 27% at 21. So just some question, is Medicaid based on income? I'm not sure how I do believe that Medicaid is income based for youth who are not in foster care, right? For youth who are not in foster care after the age of 18, I do think that it's income based. But for our youth who are in our system, if they were in care at 18, they're going to get that Medicaid until they're 26. Okay. I just wanted to share that we every year we have to report to the feds, and we have to make sure that we're sharing with our partners our data, so that you guys get an idea of where we are as a state. In some areas, nationally, we are in line, and in some areas, Michigan is not. We need to do better in some of these areas, particularly as it relates to housing and our youth indicating that they are homeless and those sorts of things. This is also public information, and I could send out the link to the website, and you could actually, if you're interested, if you're into data, I'm not a big data person, but if you're into data, you can actually see other states' data, and you can see kind of where Michigan compares to other states. We're always looking to just improve. Essentially, this is what the federal government uses to look at our outcomes for young people, and it also it determines some of our financial in terms of YIT. So we're always looking at how we can just improve our system so that we can have better outcomes for our young people. I think that might actually be the last slide, or this may be the last slide. Oh no, okay, this is the last slide. Outside of our last information with me and Ann's email addresses. So just looking at the data, what we know here in Michigan, and some of the things that we have to focus on is educational attainment, right? Making sure that our young people are first getting their high school diplomas, and I know Ann is doing a lot of work on and in regards to that, but also ensuring that if they get their high school, can we get them to your institutions, right? Another thing that we know we need to focus on is our homeless youth, right? Our youth that are homeless. The other piece is family planning, and then employment, right? Ensuring that our young people have the skills to become successful, and that can be done through education and employment. And so that's just our implications that we know that we have to kind of focus on for the future. I think that's the last slide. I think the next slide has my email and Ann's email. Which I think we all have Ann's email.
Brandi, do you want to put the YIT email box in the chat too?
Yes, I will do that.
There was a question.
Yeah, I was going to say, are there any questions while I'm looking for the YIT mailbox?
The last one that I saw that came in, if they're adopted, well, they'll be eligible for FCMA. So in order to be eligible for the specific Medicaid of FCMA, their foster care case had to be open at the age of when they turned 18. So if a youth's adopted at 16, they're not going to get FCMA.
Are there any other questions?
And I know, Carrie, you'll send out the slides and all the different things we've talked about as far as handouts and stuff. There was Brandi, was one of the handouts a contact sheet for the MYY coordinators? Because that was asked for. And then that's the YIT mailbox. Today,
and so feel free, you can share this mailbox with it's like a public mailbox, right? You can share this mailbox with youth if they're wanting to determine if they're eligible for YIT, or if they're just having some challenges accessing YIT.
And the current question about the U.S. citizen, if you can shoot me an email, I can get you a good contact for that question. Charmaine Sanders, there's a question. So I got a call from a private agency worker today asking about funding for a young lady who's not a U.S. citizen. They want funding for her to live in the dorm. I can get some more information from you and then get you in touch with the right person for that.
far as resources go, Anne and Brandi sent me a whole lot of stuff ahead of time too that they've referred to throughout the course of the presentation. And I'm actually going to create a toolkit on the FSM website that's going to include the recording. It's going to include all of the different forms and that sort of thing. And my plan is also to continue to produce like kind of onboarding toolkits or like check-in training toolkits with this kind of information on a yearly basis, so that we're always touching base with you and that you're always familiar with like the overall view of things. But we also really understand that there's tons of information. I've, heard this stuff a bazillion times, but I still get confused. So the most important thing is just to being able to reach out to Anna and Brandi when you do have questions. Do we have anyone else who has any other questions or concerns before we end today? Okay. Well, thank you so much, Anne and Brandi, for sharing your expertise with us. And we always appreciate you in partnership and all the work that you do. So we really appreciate your time. And I will talk to everyone soon.